The clock on the dashboard showed 11:42 p.m. as Mayor Darius Harris drove his silver sedan through the quiet streets of Westridge. The community meeting about the new youth center had run later than expected, but it had been worth it. The voices of concerned parents and eager teenagers still echoed in his mind as he turned onto Maple Avenue, just 2 miles from his home. Darius loosened his tie and rolled his shoulders to release the tension from sitting too long. He had been mayor of Westridge for just over a year now, and nights like these reminded him why he had run for office in the first place. The chance to make real change in the community that had raised him felt worth every late night and heated debate. The flash of blue and red lights in his rearview mirror broke his train of thought. Darius checked his speedometer. He was going exactly the speed limit. Maybe a tail light was out. He signaled and pulled over carefully to the curb, watching in his side mirror as the police cruiser stopped behind him. Darius took a deep breath and placed both hands on the steering wheel, where they would be visible. As the first black mayor of Westridge, he was painfully aware that this routine interaction came with added risks. He had given the talk to his own teenage son just last year. Keep your hands visible, speak respectfully, move slowly. The officer took his time approaching the car. In the mirror, Darius could see him adjust something on his belt before walking forward with a stiff gait. The beam of a flashlight swept across his back window, then directly into his side mirror, momentarily blinding him. License and registration, the officer demanded without preamble, his hand resting on his holster rather than holding a ticket book or notepad. "Good evening, officer," Darius said calmly, keeping his hands where they were. "May I ask why I was pulled over?" The flashlight beam moved to Darius's face, lingering there. "License and registration now," the officer repeated, his voice harder. "Of course," Darius said. "I'm going to reach for my wallet in my back pocket and then get my registration from the glove compartment. Is that okay?" The officer didn't respond, but Darius could see his posture tighten. Moving deliberately, Darius retrieved his wallet and pulled out his driver's license. When he reached toward the glove compartment, he narrated his actions. "Just getting my registration now." As he handed over the documents, Darius said, "I'm Mayor Harris, by the way. Is there a problem with my vehicle?" The officer, whose nameplate read Watts, stared at the license for a long moment. His expression changed almost imperceptibly, a slight narrowing of the eyes that made Darius's stomach tighten. "Step out of the car," Officer Watts said, taking a half step back. "May I ask, why?" Darius kept his voice even, though his heart rate picked up. This wasn't a normal traffic stop procedure. "I said step out of the car now." Watts's hand moved from his holster to his gun, unsnapping the retention strap. Darius noticed headlights slow on the opposite side of the street. A car pulled over, its interior light coming on as someone inside appeared to be watching the scene unfold. A witness, that was good. "Officer Watts," Darius said, reading the nameplate again. "I'm happy to comply, but I'd like to understand the reason for this." "Stop." "I don't believe I was speeding or violating any traffic laws." Watts drew his weapon in one swift motion, pointing it directly at Darius through the driver's side window. "Out of the car. Hands where I can see them." Time seemed to slow down. Darius felt a cold wave wash over him, his mayoral title suddenly meaningless in the face of the gun barrel only feet from his head. He had done nothing wrong. Yet here he was, living the scenario he had feared since he was a teenager learning to drive. "I'm going to open the door very slowly," Darius said, his voice somehow remaining steady despite the adrenaline surging through his body. "My hands are visible. I am not armed. I am complying with your request." With excruciating slowness, Darius opened the car door with his left hand, his right hand still on the steering wheel. The dome light came on, fully illuminating the interior of the car. He moved his right hand to join his left, both clearly empty and raised slightly. "On the ground, face down," Watts shouted, taking another step back and widening his stance. "Officer, I'm the mayor of Westridge," Darius said, not moving yet. "There seems to be a misunderstanding. Could you please tell me why I was stopped?" "I don't care if you're the president," Watts spat out. "You fit the description of a suspect. Now get on the ground before I make you." Across the street, the door of the parked car opened. A woman stepped out, holding up her phone, clearly recording the encounter. Darius felt a mixture of relief and humiliation. At least there would be evidence of whatever happened next. "What suspect?" Darius asked, still not moving to lie on the ground. "What crime?" Officer Watts's face twisted with anger. "Last warning," he said. And Darius could hear something in his voice that went beyond professional authority, something personal and ugly. From behind Officer Watts, another set of headlights approached. The vehicle slowed, then pulled over sharply. The door opened immediately and a woman in a police uniform stepped out. "Officer Watts!" she called out, her voice carrying the unmistakable tone of command. "What's going on here?" Watts didn't lower, his weapon or turnaround, keeping his eyes and gun trained on Darius. "Handling a suspicious person, Deputy Chief. I've got it under control." The woman, Deputy Chief by her uniform insignia, approached with careful steps. "Is that Mayor Harris?" she asked, moving to where she could see better while staying clear of Watts's line of fire. "Claims to be," Watts said, his gun still aimed at Darius's chest. "Fits the description of a suspect in that convenience store robbery on Oak Street." Deputy Chief Rodriguez, Darius could read her nameplate now, looked between Watts and the mayor, her expression shifting from confusion to concern. "Officer Watts, that suspect was reported as a teenager, about 5'7", she said evenly. Mayor Harris is at least 6 feet tall and in his 40s. Darius remained perfectly still, hands visible, watching the interaction between the officers. The woman across the street was still recording, her presence a small comfort in the terrifying situation. "Lower your weapon, officer," Rodriguez ordered, her voice firm but calm. "This is clearly not our suspect." Watts didn't move. He was uncooperative and argumentative when I asked for ID. Rodriguez moved slightly closer. "Kevin, I'm telling you to lower your weapon. Now." Something in Watts's posture changed, a slight tensing that made Darius's breath catch. The gun in the officer's hand seemed to waver, and for a moment Darius wasn't sure if he was going to lower it or do something much worse. The woman across the street called out, "I'm recording all of this." Her voice cut through the tension, reminding everyone present that this moment was being documented. Rodriguez's hand moved to her own weapon, though she didn't draw it. "Officer Watts, stand down immediately. That is a direct order." Time stretched as Watts stood frozen, gun still pointed at the mayor of Westridge, who remained half in and half out of his car with his hands raised. Darius could hear his own heartbeat, loud in his ears. He thought about his wife at home, probably already wondering why he was late. He thought about his son, who would be waiting to hear about the community meeting. He thought about all the people who had voted for him, believing he could make their town better. And in that moment, as he faced the very injustice he had promised to fight against, Darius Harris made a decision. If he survived the next few minutes, he would use everything in his power to ensure no other citizen of Westridge ever faced this scenario again. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife as Officer Watts stood with his gun still pointed at Mayor Harris. The streetlights cast harsh shadows across Watts's face, highlighting the sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool spring night. Deputy Chief Rodriguez remained several feet behind Watts, her hand now resting on her own weapon. "Last time, Officer Watts." "Lower your weapon," Rodriguez said, her voice carrying the weight of authority and years of experience. "This is Mayor Harris, not our robbery suspect." Across the street, the woman recording the incident took a cautious step closer. "My name is Alicia Morales," she called out clearly. "I live on this street and I recognize Mayor Harris. I'm still recording everything." Watts's shoulders twitched at the sound of Alicia's voice, but his gun remained pointed at Darius. Something in his eyes looked unfocused, almost as if he were seeing something or someone else entirely. "Kevin," Rodriguez said, using his first name again, her tone softer but no less firm. "You need to think about what you're doing right. Now this is your career, your life, don't throw it away." For 3 heartbeats that felt like an eternity, no one moved. Then slowly, Watts lowered his weapon, though he didn't holster it. "Step back to your vehicle, officer," Rodriguez ordered. Watts took 2 steps backward, his eyes never leaving Darius. He was speeding, he muttered, though no one believed him. Mayor Harris, Rodriguez said, please remain where you are for a moment. She kept her attention divided between the mayor and her fellow officer. Darius nodded, his hands still raised, acutely aware that one wrong move could reignite the situation. His legs felt weak from the adrenaline, but he managed to stay steady. Rodriguez walked backward until she reached her patrol car. She pressed the radio on her shoulder. Dispatch, this is Deputy Chief Rodriguez. I need another unit at the corner of Maple and Elm. Code 3. The Code 3 indicated an emergency situation requiring immediate backup with lights and sirens. Copy that, Deputy Chief. Units en route, came the swift reply. Rodriguez returned her attention to Watts. Holster your weapon, officer. Now. Watts finally complied, though his hand remained near his hip. He was disrespectful, he said, as if trying to justify his actions to himself as much as to Rodriguez. I have this under control, Rodriguez told him firmly. Return to your vehicle and wait there. For a moment it seemed like Watts might refuse. Then, with visible reluctance, he turned and walked back to his patrol car. Rodriguez waited until he was several yards away before approaching Darius. Mayor Harris, she said, her voice professional but sympathetic. Are you all right? Darius slowly lowered his hands, feeling the blood rush back into his fingers. Physically, yes, he answered. Honestly, his heart was still racing, and he could feel a slight tremor in his hands that he hoped wasn't visible to others. I apologize for this incident, Rodriguez said quietly. I need you to stay here until backup arrives, but you can return to your car if you'd like. Darius shook his head. I think I'd rather stay in the open where everyone can see what's happening. He glanced toward Alicia, who was still recording from across the street. Rodriguez nodded in understanding. That's your right. In the distance, sirens wailed, growing louder as they approached. Darius took a deep breath, trying to process what had just happened, what was still happening. As the mayor, he had attended dozens of police community relations meetings. He had reviewed use of force policies and helped implement new training programs, yet none of that had protected him tonight. Can you tell me why he pulled me over? Darius asked Rodriguez. She shook her head slightly. I'm not sure there was a legitimate reason, she admitted in a low voice. I was driving home from my shift. When I saw the lights, I only stopped because I recognized your car. The honesty in her response both appreciated and disturbed Darius. If she hadn't driven by at that exact moment, how might this night have ended? 2 police cruisers turned onto Maple Avenue, lights flashing. They pulled up behind Rodriguez's car and 4 officers quickly emerged. One of them was Captain Frank Delgado, who immediately approached Darius and Rodriguez. Mayor Harris? Delgado said, surprise evident in his voice. What's going on here? Before either could answer, Alicia Morales called out from across the street. That officer pulled a gun on the mayor for no reason. I have it all on video. Delgado looked from Alicia to Rodriguez, who gave a small, confirming nod. I need to secure the scene, Rodriguez told Delgado. Officer Watts is in his vehicle. I want his weapon secured and him removed from the area. Delgado seemed to understand the seriousness of the situation immediately. He gestured to 2 of the other officers who moved toward Watts's patrol car. Mayor Harris, Delgado said, turning back to Darius. I can't tell you how sorry I am about this. Darius straightened his tie, a gesture that felt absurdly normal in such an abnormal situation. I don't want apologies, Captain. I want answers. His voice was steady now, the initial shock giving way to the focused determination that had won him the election. Alicia Morales crossed the street, her phone still. Recording. Mayor Harris, are you okay? Do you need me to call anyone? I'm fine, thank you, Darius said, though fine was far from how he felt. And thank you for stopping and recording. That was brave. It wasn't brave, Alicia said firmly. It was necessary. She turned to Rodriguez and Delgado. I've already uploaded the video to the cloud, just so everyone's clear on that. Delgado nodded, understanding the implied message. The evidence couldn't be erased. From Officer Watts's patrol, Car came the sound of raised voices. Watts was refusing to exit his vehicle. "I need to deal with this," Rodriguez said to Darius. "Captain Delgado will take your statement if that's okay." Before Darius could respond, Watts suddenly burst out of his patrol car, pushing past one of the officers who had approached him. His face was red with anger as he shouted across the street. "You think your title protects you?" he yelled at Darius. "You people always think you're above the law." The words hung in the air, their meaning unmistakable to everyone present. Delgado winced visibly while Rodriguez's expression hardened into stone. "Get him out of here, now," she ordered the other officers, who moved quickly to restrain Watts. As they led the still shouting officer to one of the patrol cars, Darius stood perfectly still, his face a careful mask that hid the storm of emotions beneath. The slur hadn't surprised him. He had sensed the hatred behind Watts's actions from the beginning, but hearing it spoken so openly, in front of other officers and a citizen, made the reality of what he had just experienced impossible to deny or downplay. "That seals it," Alicia said quietly, still recording. "He just showed everyone exactly who he is." Darius turned to Captain Delgado. "I want his body cam footage secured immediately. And I want the footage from every officer who just arrived. Nothing gets deleted or accidentally overwritten." Delgado nodded. "I'll personally ensure all video is preserved, Mayor." In the patrol car, Watts had fallen silent, staring out the window with a mixture of defiance and dawning realization on his face. The consequences of his actions were beginning to sink in. "I'd like to make a phone call," Darius said. "I need to let my family know I'll be late." As he reached for his phone, Darius noticed his hands were steady now. The fear was still there, lurking beneath the surface, but it had been joined by something stronger: resolve. What had happened tonight was not just about him. It was about every black person in Westridge who had ever been pulled over without cause, questioned without reason, or made to feel unsafe by the very people sworn to protect them. As mayor, he had the power to demand change, and after tonight, that's exactly what he intended to do. By midnight, the quiet residential street had transformed into a scene of intense activity. 3 police cars with flashing lights lined the curb. Officer Watts sat in the back of one cruiser, staring straight ahead with a blank expression. Yellow police tape marked off the area where the confrontation had occurred, though there was no crime scene to preserve beyond the invisible marks of prejudice and abuse of power. Darius stood near his car, finishing his phone call with his wife, Vanessa. "I'm fine," he assured her for the 3rd time. "Yes, physically fine. I'll explain everything when I get home." He glanced at the officers taking measurements and photographs of the scene. It might be a while, though. After ending the call, Darius turned to find Deputy Chief Rodriguez approaching him. Her face showed the strain of the last hour, but her posture remained professional. "Mayor Harris, we've secured Officer Watts's body cam and patrol car camera footage," she said. "I've also ordered the immediate collection of all radio communications related to this incident." Darius nodded. "Thank you. What happens now?" "Captain Delgado is taking Officer Watts to the station. He'll be suspended immediately pending investigation." Rodriguez hesitated, then added, "I'd like to take your formal statement, either here or at the station, whichever you prefer." Before Darius could answer, a news van pulled up at the end of the block. The police officer manning the perimeter spoke briefly with the driver, then walked over to Rodriguez. "Channel 8. News is here," he said. "They're saying they received an anonymous tip about an incident involving the mayor." Rodriguez and Darius exchanged looks. News traveled fast in Westridge. "That would be me," Alicia Morales said, approaching, then with her phone in hand. "I sent the video to the news. People need to see what happened here." Rather than seeming angry, Darius felt a wave of gratitude toward Alicia. Without her video, this incident might have been buried under paperwork and excuses. "Thank you," he said simply. Alicia nodded. "I've lived in Westridge my whole life. I've seen how some officers treat people who look like you. It's time everyone else saw it too." Rodriguez cleared her throat. "Mayor Harris, about your statement." "I'll go to the station," Darius decided. But first, I'd like a word with the press. Rodriguez looked like she wanted to advise against this, but recognized it wasn't her place to tell the mayor what to do. Of course, I can drive you to the station afterward. As Darius walked toward the news van, he felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. What he said now would set the tone for how the city responded to this incident. He could feel anger burning inside him, at Watts, at a system that had allowed someone like him to carry a badge and gun, at the fact that his position as mayor hadn't protected him from racial profiling. But he knew that expressing that anger now would only feed into stereotypes and potentially undermine what needed to happen next. The reporter, Sandra Lee, approached with a cameraman trailing behind her. She looked surprised to see the mayor, walking toward her voluntarily. "Mayor Harris," she began, "we received information that there was an incident involving you and the police tonight. Can you tell us what happened?" Darius took a deep breath. "About an hour ago, I was pulled over by a Westridge police officer while driving home from a community meeting. During that stop, the officer drew his weapon and pointed it at me without provocation or justification." The reporter's eyes widened. "Were you injured?" "No," Darius said, "thanks to the intervention of Deputy Chief Rodriguez, who happened to drive by, and a brave citizen who recorded the incident. The situation was de-escalated." "Do you believe you were targeted because of your race?" Sandra asked directly. Darius met her gaze. The officer's own words captured on video make it clear that bias played a role in his actions tonight. "But I want to be careful not to paint the entire Westridge Police Department with the same brush." The swift response of Deputy Chief Rodriguez and Captain Delgado shows that many of our officers are committed to protecting all citizens equally. Sandra nodded, then asked, "What happens next?" "The officer has been suspended pending a full investigation. I will be giving a formal statement at the police station tonight." "Beyond that," Darius paused, considering his words carefully, "I believe this incident highlights the urgent need for the police reforms that my administration has been advocating for since I took office." As he finished speaking, Darius noticed Chief George Bennett arriving at the scene. The police chief, a 30-year veteran of the force, looked grim as he surveyed the activity around him. "Mayor Harris," Chief Bennett said as he approached, "I came as soon as I heard. I want to personally apologize for what happened tonight." Darius was aware of the camera still recording them. "I appreciate that, Chief. I think we should continue this conversation at the station." Chief Bennett nodded, understanding the mayor's desire to move their discussion away from the media. "My car is right here," he offered. After confirming with Rodriguez that she would meet them at the station, Darius followed the chief to his unmarked police vehicle. As they drove away from the scene, an uncomfortable silence filled the car. Finally, Chief Bennett spoke. "I want you to know that Officer Watts's actions tonight do not reflect the values of our department." "Don't they?" Darius asked quietly. "Because I've been hearing complaints from citizens about officers like Watts since before I became mayor. The difference is that this time it happened to someone who can't be ignored." Bennett gripped the steering wheel tighter. "We've implemented the training programs you advocated for. We've revised our use of force policies. And yet tonight one of your officers pulled a gun on an unarmed citizen during a routine traffic stop," Darius pointed out. "A traffic stop that appears to have had no legitimate basis in the first place." "Watts will be dealt with," Bennett assured him. "He won't be a police officer in Westridge or anywhere else when this is over." "This isn't just about one officer, George," Darius said, using the chief's first name to emphasize that this conversation went beyond their official roles. "It's about a culture that allowed him to think he could get away with it. It's about how many others like him might still be wearing the badge." They pulled into the parking lot behind the police station. Several officers standing outside fell silent as they recognized the chief's car and its passenger. "We need to talk about real change," Darius continued as Bennett parked. "Not just policies on paper, but a fundamental shift in how your department operates." Chief Bennett turned off the engine and sat for a moment in silence. "What are you proposing?" "A complete review of all officers' records, body cams that can't be turned off, an independent civilian review board with actual power." Darius listed the items that had been on his reform agenda for months, but had been met with resistance from the police union and some city council members. Bennett looked tired suddenly, the lines on his face deeper in the harsh parking lot lights. The union will fight you on all of that. Let them, Darius said with quiet determination. After tonight, with video evidence of what happened, public opinion will be on our side. This is our chance to make real change, George. The question is whether you want to be part of that change or an obstacle to it. Before the chief could respond, there was a knock on the window. Deputy Chief Rodriguez had arrived with Captain Delgado. It was time for Darius to give his formal statement. As he stepped out of the car, Darius could see officers watching him through the windows of the station. Some looked concerned, others curious, a few possibly hostile. He straightened his shoulders and walked toward the entrance, knowing that what happened inside the station tonight would be just the beginning of a long and difficult fight for justice. But it was a fight he was now more determined than ever to win. The interview room at the Westridge police station felt cold and impersonal. Darius sat at a metal table across from Captain Delgado and an officer from Internal Affairs named Susan Powell. A camera in the corner recorded everything. Chief Bennett and Deputy Chief Rodriguez watched from behind a one-way mirror in the next room. "Let's go through it one more time," Officer Powell said, her pen poised over her notepad. "You were driving home from a community meeting about the new youth center. What time did the meeting end?" "Around 11:30, Darius replied. His voice sounded tired even to his own ears. It was nearly 2 a.m. now, and the adrenaline that had kept him going was starting to wear off. "And Officer Watts pulled you over at approximately 11:45 p.m. on Maple Avenue," Powell continued, checking her notes. "Did he activate his lights and siren?" "Just the lights," Darius said. "I pulled over right away." "What happened when he approached your vehicle?" Darius recounted the events again, how Watts had demanded his license and registration without explaining why he'd been stopped, how the officer's hand had rested on his holster from the beginning, how things had escalated when Darius identified himself as the mayor. As he spoke, Powell wrote rapidly in her notepad. Captain Delgado's expression grew increasingly troubled. "At what point did Officer Watts draw his weapon?" Powell asked. "When I asked him for the second time why I had been pulled over," Darius said. "That's when he ordered me out of the car, and when I asked why, he drew his gun." "Did he say anything that indicated bias or prejudice at that time?" Darius shook his head. "Not in words, no. But there was no reason to draw a weapon on an unarmed driver during a routine traffic stop." "And later," Delgado added, "after Deputy Chief Rodriguez arrived and other officers were on scene, that's when he made the comment about you people thinking you're above the law." "Yes," Darius confirmed. "That was after he was being taken into custody." Powell made another note. "We've secured the body cam footage and Ms. Morales' video. We'll review those as part of the investigation." "I want to see that footage," Darius said firmly. "All of it." Powell and Delgado exchanged glances. "That's not typically," Powell began. "I'm not making a typical request," Darius interrupted. "I'm the mayor of this city, and I was just held at gunpoint by one of our officers, without cause. I want to see the footage, and I want copies provided to my office." After a moment, Delgado nodded. "I'll make sure you get access to everything, Mayor Harris." The door opened, and Chief Bennett entered with Rodriguez behind him. "I think we've kept the mayor long enough for tonight," Bennett said. "We can continue this tomorrow if needed." Darius stood up, straightening his wrinkled suit jacket. Despite the late hour, his mind was clear on what needed to happen next. "I want Officer Watts's complete personnel file on my desk by noon tomorrow, and I want records of all complaints filed against him during his time with the department." Bennett looked uncomfortable. "Mayor, there are procedures for—" "I understand the procedures," Darius cut in. "I also understand that this incident goes beyond one traffic stop. I need to know if there's a pattern of behavior that was ignored or overlooked." Bennett seemed about to argue, but then simply nodded. "You'll have everything by noon." "Thank you." Darius turned to Rodriguez. "Deputy Chief, would it be possible to get a ride home? My car is still at the scene." "Of course," she said. "I'll drive you myself." As they walked through the station, Darius was aware of the eyes following him, some sympathetic, others wary. News of what had happened had clearly spread throughout the department. He kept his head high and his expression neutral, though exhaustion pulled at every muscle in his body. Outside, the night air felt refreshingly cool after the stuffy interview room. Rodriguez led him to her unmarked police car and opened the passenger door. Once they were driving, Darius finally allowed himself to slump slightly in his seat. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For stopping tonight. For intervening." Rodriguez kept her eyes on the road. "I was just doing my job." "We both know it was more than that," Darius said. "If you hadn't driven by at that exact moment." She glanced at him briefly. "I've known Kevin Watts for 5 years. I never thought he would—" She didn't finish the sentence. "Really?" Darius couldn't keep the skepticism from his voice. "You never saw signs?" Rodriguez was silent for a long moment. "There were comments," she finally admitted. "Things said in the locker room or during shifts. I told myself they were just jokes, not serious." "But you knew," Darius pressed. "You knew there were officers who felt that way." Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Yes," she said softly. "I knew. We all did." The admission hung in the air between them as Rodriguez turned onto Darius's street. The lights were still on in his house, Vanessa waiting up for him. "What happens now?" Rodriguez asked as she pulled into his driveway. "Now," Darius said, his voice finding new strength, "we make sure what happened tonight never happens to anyone else in Westridge." Before he could open his door, Rodriguez turned to face him directly. "Mayor Harris, I want you to know that not everyone in the department thinks like Watts. Many of us became officers to protect people, all people. We want change too." Darius nodded. "Then I'm going to need allies like you in the days ahead because this won't be easy." "I understand," she said. "And I'm ready to help however I can." As Darius walked to his front door, he could see Vanessa's silhouette through the curtains. She opened the door before he reached it, pulling him into a tight embrace as soon as he stepped inside. "I saw the news," she whispered against his shoulder. "Are you really okay?" Darius held her close, drawing strength from her presence. "I'm okay," he assured her. "Shaken, but okay." They moved to the living room, where their 17-year-old son, Marcus, sat on the couch in his pajamas, his face tight with worry and anger. "Dad," Marcus said, standing up. "They're saying on social media that a cop pulled a gun on you." Darius nodded, not wanting to lie to his son but wishing he could shield him from this reality. "Yes, that's what happened." Marcus's hands clenched into fists. "Because you're black?" The directness of the question hit Darius hard. This was the reality they lived with, the conversations they had to have, the truths they couldn't avoid. "That appears to be part of it, yes," he answered honestly. Marcus shook his head, anger flashing in his eyes. "And what's going to happen? To him? A paid vacation while they investigate?" "No," Darius said firmly. "Not this time." He put his hand on his son's shoulder. "I promise you, this time will be different." Vanessa brought Darius a cup of tea and sat beside him on the couch. The phone's been ringing nonstop. City council members, community leaders, reporters. "There's going to be a lot of attention on this," Darius acknowledged. "I need to be ready." "What are you planning?" Vanessa asked, knowing her husband well enough to see the determination beneath his exhaustion. "The reforms we've been pushing for, the ones that kept getting blocked or watered down. They can't be ignored anymore." Darius sipped his tea, his mind already mapping out the strategy. "This is our chance to make real change in the department." Marcus sat across from them, listening intently. "You think the council will support you now?" "They'll have to," Darius said. "With the video evidence and public pressure, they won't have a choice." Later, after Marcus had finally gone to bed, Darius and Vanessa sat together in the quiet living room. The clock on the wall showed 3:30 a.m. "You should try to get some sleep," Vanessa said gently, Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Darius nodded but made no move to stand. I keep thinking about how easily this could have gone differently, he said quietly. If Rodriguez hadn't driven by, if Alicia hadn't been recording. Vanessa took his hand, her fingers warm against his. But they were there. And now you have the chance to make sure no one else has to depend on that kind of luck. Darius squeezed her hand, drawing strength from her unwavering support. Tomorrow would indeed be a long day, the first of many as he fought to transform this traumatic experience into meaningful change for his city. 3 months had passed since that night on Maple Avenue. The summer sun beat down on the crowd gathered outside City Hall, where workers were installing a new sign that read, Community Safety and Justice Center, above the entrance to what had formerly been known simply as Police Headquarters. Darius stood at a podium on the steps, looking out at the diverse faces of Westridge residents who had come to witness this moment. News cameras lined the edges of the plaza, and reporters scribbled in notepads. At the front of the crowd stood Alicia Morales, whose video had been viewed millions of times and had become a catalyst for change. Today marks not an ending, but a beginning, Darius said into the microphone, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. 3 months ago, I experienced firsthand what too many of our citizens have faced for years, the fear and humiliation of being treated as a criminal based solely on the color of my skin. He paused, looking down at his prepared remarks and then setting them aside. What happened to me that night was wrong, but the response from this community has been right. You demanded accountability. You insisted on transparency. And together, we have taken the first steps toward creating a police department that truly serves and protects all people of Westridge. The journey to this day had not been easy. The morning after the incident, Darius had arrived at his office to find Officer Watts's personnel file waiting for him as requested. What he discovered was disturbing but not surprising, a history of complaints from minority residents, all dismissed or ruled unfounded, despite similar patterns in the allegations. There were also troubling performance reviews that noted Watts's aggressive approach, but failed to recommend any corrective action. Armed with this evidence, and the body cam footage, which clearly showed Watts using racial slurs under his breath, even before approaching Darius's car, the mayor had called an emergency city council meeting. The debate had been heated, with some council members arguing for caution and others demanding immediate action. In the end, with public pressure mounting and the video evidence impossible to ignore, the council had voted 7-2 to approve the most comprehensive police reform package in the city's history. Now 3 months later, the changes were becoming visible. Darius gestured to the row of people seated behind him, Chief Bennett, Deputy Chief Rodriguez, recently promoted to Assistant Chief, and the 7 members of the newly formed Civilian Oversight Board. The reforms we've implemented are substantial, Darius continued, turning his attention back to the crowd. Every officer now wears a body cam that cannot be turned off during interactions with the public. All complaints are now reviewed by an independent board of citizens with the power to recommend disciplinary action. And perhaps most importantly, we've completely revamped our hiring and training procedures to ensure that those who wear the badge understand that their duty is to every resident of this city, regardless of race, religion, or background. What Darius didn't mention was the resistance he'd faced along the way. The police union had fought the reforms at every turn. Anonymous threats had been left on his office voicemail. Some officers had resigned in protest. But for each one who left, 3 new applicants stepped forward, drawn by the promise of being part of a department committed to real change. As for former Officer Watts, Darius said, addressing the question that many had been asking, he has been charged with assault, misconduct, and civil rights violations. His trial is scheduled for next month. But today isn't about one individual. It's about systemic change that ensures no one else faces what I faced that night. From her seat behind him, Assistant Chief Rodriguez nodded slightly. She had become one of Darius's strongest allies in implementing the reforms, facing criticism from some of her fellow officers, but standing firm in her commitment to change. I want to thank someone special, Darius said, looking toward Alicia, in the crowd. Ms. Alicia Morales, whose courage in recording that night and sharing the truth made it impossible for this incident to be buried or forgotten. Please join me in recognizing her bravery. The crowd applauded as Alicia smiled and nodded, embarrassed by the attention but proud of her role in sparking change. After the ceremony, as the crowd began to disperse, Darius found himself face with a group of young black teenagers, students from Westridge High School who had been active in organizing peaceful protests following the incident. "Mayor Harris," one of the boys said, extending his hand. "I'm Jordan. We just wanted to say thank you for not letting this get swept under the rug." Darius shook Jordan's hand firmly. "Thank you for keeping the pressure on. Your voices matter." "Do you really think things will be different now?" another teen asked, her expression a mixture of hope and skepticism. It was a fair question, one that Darius had asked himself many times over the past 3 months. "I think we've made a good start," he answered honestly. "But lasting change takes time and constant vigilance. That's why we need young people like you to stay engaged." As the teens nodded and moved away, Darius felt a hand on his shoulder. It was his son Marcus who had come to the ceremony with Vanessa. "That was a good speech, Dad," Marcus said. "Short but powerful." Darius smiled, noting how his son stood taller these days, with a new confidence in his eyes. The night of the incident had shaken Marcus deeply, but watching his father turn that trauma into action had affected him profoundly. "Thanks," Darius said. "I think people are tired of long speeches. They want to see results." Vanessa linked her arm through his. "And they're seeing them. The community safety programs, the new training, the oversight board. These are real changes." They were interrupted by Assistant Chief Rodriguez, who approached with a tablet in hand. "Mayor Harris, I wanted to show you something before it goes public." On the screen was a graph showing use of force incidents by Westridge police officers over the past 3 months compared to the previous year. The decline was dramatic, nearly 60%. "And this isn't because officers aren't doing their jobs," Rodriguez added quickly. "Arrest rates for violent crimes are stable. It's the unnecessary escalations that have decreased." Darius studied the data, feeling a cautious sense of satisfaction. "This is encouraging, but we need to make sure it's not just a temporary reaction to scrutiny." "Agreed," Rodriguez said. "That's why the ongoing training and oversight are so important." As they walked back toward City Hall, Darius noticed Alicia Morales speaking with a reporter. She caught his eye and gave him a thumbs up. He returned the gesture, remembering how her simple act of bearing witness had changed the course of his city. Inside his office, Darius found a stack of letters on his desk, messages from residents sharing their own experiences with police and thanking him for pushing for change. He picked up the top envelope, which contained a handwritten note from an elderly black woman who had lived in Westridge for over 60 years. "For the first time in my life," she had written, "I believe that maybe, just maybe, my grandchildren won't have to live in fear of those who are supposed to protect them." Darius sat down, holding the letter carefully. There was still so much work to do. The reforms they'd implemented were just the beginning. Changing laws and policies was one thing. Changing hearts and minds was another. Some officers still resisted the new direction. Some citizens remained skeptical that anything would really change. But as he looked out his window at the new sign being unveiled across the street, Darius felt something he hadn't fully allowed himself to feel until this moment. Hope. Not naive optimism that everything would suddenly be perfect, but a grounded hope that meaningful change was possible when people refused to accept injustice as inevitable. What had happened that night on Maple Avenue, a racist cop pulling a gun on a black mayor, had been a moment of terrible truth for Westridge. But what had happened afterward was becoming a story of transformation, not just for one police department, but potentially for an entire community. And that, Darius thought, as he turned back to the work still waiting on his desk, was a legacy worth building.